Ich weiß nicht, was los ist. Yeah, Joey,
Yeah.
having a strong signal here.
You sure it's on?
Ja. Das war dann eigentlich so ein Bubentraum, ja, so ein Flugzeug zu finden wieder. Ah. Hier. Da ist wirklich das Kind in mir herausgekommen.
I'm skeptical.
Ah, ja?
Yeah.
Also ausschlaggebend dafür war, dass meine Mutter mir erzählt hat, wie sie und mein Vater beobachtet haben, wie dieses brennende Flugzeug hier crasht ist.
Ah, yeah.
Kommt jetzt was. Und dass Piloten abgesprungen sind. Ein ganz dickes Stück Eisen, höchstwahrscheinlich von einer Bombe, die explodiert ist. Die Sorge in mir, was ist aus diesen armen 20-Jährigen, so wie ich wusste, dass das ganz junge Burschen war. Und ich habe auch gewusst, dass das höchstwahrscheinlich sie nicht sehr nett empfangen wurden. Vielleicht sind sie sofort erschossen worden, sind sie aufgehängt worden. Das war ständig in meinem Kopf. Ah, that you got to see now, a bullet. Most of them are empty. So it was produced in 1943.
Georg digs really deep into anything he's interested in. He was spending hours and hours and hours on the computer, checking things and checking emails and Google Earth. You know, put it all in, find out, then see the satellite view of it. Going down rabbit warrens in wrong directions partly, and then thinking you found something, then you haven't found it, or whatever it was. So it was all very, very detailed.
My idea was first to just find the site where it had crashed. Wo war dieses Teil? Hier. And then I thought maybe I can find out more about the crew, but nobody really knew anything. I just started from scratch. The guy in the library said, well, what are you looking for? And after a while, he showed me a book. In the back of that book, all Allied plane crashes in the years 43 and 44. It had the serial number of the plane, date, the place where it crashed. And I put that serial number in the Google search machine, and I came to an American veteran site. They had declassified information. It had even the names of the crew. I had next of kin, their father, their mother, or a sibling. And I had the town where they came from. Und der nächste Schritt war dann einfach zu versuchen herauszufinden, was ist aus denen geworden. Ich habe wahnsinnig gern so Sachen, wo du keine Ahnung hast, wo du hinkommst.
Haben wir Benzin genug?
Jetzt ist
Weißt
die
du, wo du
Frage,
bist?
jetzt muss ich schauen, wo ich bin. Aber ich glaube, hier war ich schon einmal. Ich bin ja da hier schon oft herumgefahren. Warum? Mal schauen, wo sind wir jetzt? So, ich würde sagen, irgendwo auf der Höhe, da wird der Daniel Perry gelandet sein. I made a map to show where the flight path ran over that hill where they jumped near Übelbach. It's really very accurate now where at least those 5 came down. Sim came down right at the bottom of the hill, then Dan Barry in the middle, Jim Helf on top, and then Seal landed on a big tree with his parachute but broke his leg and was hanging up there until somebody came to cut him down. Da oben. Wow, so hoch noch. Wie hoch ist er jetzt noch? 170 Meter. Nur 170 Meter. Das müsstest du nicht. Wo ist der arme Sil da oben gelandet? Boah, schon ganz nah dran. Ups.
Spell the last name for me?
Seal, S-E-A-L-L.
Okay. No one here by that name, ma'am.
5-3.
What am I supposed to say?
What are you supposed to say? Try and find out the best you can if the guy's still alive.
If this is a maintenance emergency, please press 0 to speak to an operator. Thank you.
Well, you could have spoken to an operator.
The operator's not going to help anybody. Off camera, it really has driven me nuts sometimes. And at some points I've thought this has really grown out of proportion.
Try this number again that we said was besetzt. Ich gebe nicht auf, so leicht. Genau, das stachelt mich an. Ich habe keine Ahnung gehabt, wo das hinführt, nicht?
I got up to go practice drums. When I parked the car and here my cell phone rings with this strange number with 14 digits or something. Well, this is unusual.
It rang and it rang and it rang. Finally, somebody picked up. Hello, hello.
And here's this man with a strange accent. I want to get in touch with Mick Berry. And then, well, as a telemarketer, great, okay.
I knew that I had to be very fast with my story.
My mother saw your father's plane get shot down in Austria.
Mick then really was quiet for a moment.
Okay.
We both had goose pimples at that moment.
And he said, I want to find out what happened to the servicemen in the plane. I can tell you exactly. My father wrote it down. I have the whole thing written down. You don't have to wonder any longer. Yeah.
Account by Daniel Barry of his experience in World War II. It was written right after he came home. He got his secretary and he dictated it to her.
Daniel Barry's report was a turning point because normally you wouldn't have anything like that. So that made this particular plane and its crew much more real. Number 2 engine was leaking a stream of gas through the flame in number 1. At any moment, the ship might explode. For the first time since I'd flown combat, I put on my parachute. Jim said, "Get the hell out of this flying coffin." I remember crouching in the hatchway and looking backward. I stopped thinking and tumbled out of the narrow hatchway into space. After waiting to be sure I was clear of the plane,
I pulled my ripcord while I was still facing downward. The chute, which is attached at the chest, smacked me in the face. I saw the silk emerge from the pack in a long, thin stream, and then as the air caught it, I was jerked suddenly and felt myself floating toward the ground. Zim was behind me. We called to one another as we fell downward.
Gary?
Yes, sir.
Wow, great to see you finally.
You must be George.
Yes.
Oh, well, good.
Well, good
And
to
Mary
see you.
Ellen.
Mary Ellen, so good to see you. I had managed to get in contact with the 6 descendants that came to Austria on the 75th anniversary of the plane crash of their fathers for a reunion.
All right. Okay.
Hello, hello.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey, here he is.
Wow.
You haven't met?
No, I've never met him.
No, we've never met.
Zim's daughter, Sherry.
Go get a hug or anything? I mean, Jesus. Hey,
God.
it's
Yeah,
good
but I
to
might
meet you
fall
guys.
apart in your arms.
That's all right. I bawled when I opened the letter that, I got.
That's your dad in there.
Yeah.
My dad's in the middle, and that's Bob Zimmerman.
It's my dad. You have more pictures of my dad than I have.
Es ist unglaublich, die haben sich untereinander nicht mehr gekannt. Und ihre Väter waren beste Freunde.
What did you think when he got in touch with you?
When's he gonna ask for money? That's what I thought.
What does he really want? Yeah.
My father was called Jim Health. He was a flight engineer on the B-17.
You were the hardest one. You were really hard.
Hard to find. When I got the letter, I almost threw it in the trash. Because it was handwritten, I thought, well, okay, I'll open it up. And oh my gosh, I'm reading this letter and walking back to my bedroom and the tears are just rolling down my eyes. And I just couldn't believe that someone was actually interested. My father's name was Robert Zimmerman. He was the radio operator on the B-17. But you never found my sister, did you?
No.
Yeah, yeah.
Was she incognito?
Well, but she's been married even more often than I have, so it's even harder.
My father is Charles Hahn, and he was bombardier in the front.
My father didn't set out to talk about it, but in 1945 he hired a secretary and dictated the whole story to her.
Oh, that's wonderful.
One morning, in the tail of the B-17 was all this brain matter and guts from the previous tail gunner. As I started to hose it down, they said, "Don't worry, Sergeant, you won't suffer." Average tail gunner only sees 10 seconds of combat before he's killed. Tail gunners got killed because they'd run out of ammunition. The night before each mission, we'd break into the ammunition barracks and steal over 3 times what we were issued, so we wouldn't run out.
Look, these are all the bullets that we found.
Oh my God. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's this shiny part. It looks absolutely new, 75 years ago. It is the holder for the bombs. Yeah. Then this, it was quite deep in the ground. Yeah? I thought, what could they be? And we found out it's a walk-around oxygen bottle. Now this piece here, that's a big thing. You can hardly lift it. Yeah. As you can see, the propeller, this is exactly that part. We found these tiny little plastic parts. Our metal detector would have never found them, and they fit together. A navigator's slide ruler. For me, this is the most moving part, actually, because I know that Georg Reutter had this part in his hands. One B-17 is still flying in Europe. I managed to see the engineer, and he gave me that, and it shows you all the parts of the engine. And that helped me then to find what was what. That's exactly that, you know. I could go on and on and on, you know.
All of this you found since last summer?
Yeah.
All of it?
All of it, yeah.
And it was still there. No one
Yeah.
had ever been out there
No.
hunting for anything.
No.
It's amazing to me.
We were always afraid when we flew missions, every one of us. But we grew to love this fear and to welcome it. It was a companion one always had on these missions, and without this fear, I think any one of us would have been lost. Jim, I remember particularly, would always shake as though he had palsy when we went over heavy flak concentrations. Perhaps it was because we had been through that rough mission together that I knew better than others how he felt.
Please welcome, this is Pater August. He's a representative of the monastery, the owner of the woods.
Nice to meet you.
And it's Gott willkommen.
Where do you feel the main fuselage landed?
Right there. It really hit the top here, exploded, and parts were thrown all over the place.
Yeah.
We just go in here. Yeah? We might be lucky, maybe we are not. Ah, found already something here. So just dig more there.
Mine.
Oh, there it is!
Yeah, you
Yay,
got a
we
bullet.
found one!
You got a bullet.
Yay!
Yeah.
Whoopee! I got
Unbelievable.
Thing.
okay.
Omo here. Most likely a rock. It's big.
Oh, there it is.
Oh.
Probably.
Another
Flak
jacket.
Flak jacket.
Flak jacket.
Yeah, you didn't think we'd probably find
No,
anything.
no, nothing. I
Because
thought
you
maybe a
thought
few.
you'd done it all.
Yeah.
And there you go.
You get addicted once you found
Das ist nur eine Hülse
This
mehr.
is the bullet.
Das ist nicht
Nein, nein,
Yeah.
richtiges
Look
Geschoss.
at this. It's
Das war, Pater August, in den Flakwesten drinnen Schutz, nicht? Ja, wie eine Ritterrüstung eigentlich. Ja.
I'm so happy to see it. I'm so happy to be here. But thinking about your father being 23 and doing this, it's so hard to believe. And then to find a piece of a flak jacket, there's a connection.
Do you want to hang it very high? Or
Yeah, it's kind of the backdrop to the show.
It's a parachute. I wrote it 20 years ago or something more than that. It's not just about my father in World War II, it's about my experiences with him. I know my father, he had an uncle that was a big-time Hollywood producer, and he went to live with him after he got out of the Army because he thought he might want to be an actor, but he didn't follow through with it.
We were hit like I had never been hit by flak before, and my own tail compartment was so spotted, I could not put my hand on
any part of the wall without covering 5 or 6 holes. 1 and 2 engines were both out. 3 and 4 superchargers were out. Number 1 was burning. Number 2 was leaking gas. Jim said there was only one thing to do.
Get the hell out of this flying coffin.
Jump! It was a wonderful feeling. When I looked up and saw my parachute billow out and catch the wind, interrupted briefly by the sound of our plane exploding.
Mr. Katzbauer will explain us now what they thought at the time. And C-17.
6.
6, yeah, 6 years. Okay. Yeah. This,
Get a little closer together.
okay. And about where he's pointing now,
Haben wir gesehen, dass Gegenstände herausfallen.
they saw bombs falling out. They
Auf
saw,
einmal haben sie dann die Fallschirme geöffnet.
they realized it was the crew that jumped.
Mein Vater war Bürgermeister.
His father was the mayor of the village, and he went that direction where he saw that man coming down,
Und hat diesen jungen Soldaten gefangen genommen.
and he captured that young soldier.
Dieser Mann hat gebrochen Deutsch gesprochen.
Man was able to speak a little bit of German, a few words, enough to tell him that he had a few missions left. That for us is very clear to us that it's Cassie's and Mary Ellen's father.
Pretty exciting. I never knew he could speak any German. Makes you sad now. We know more now than we did then. I was 6 weeks old when the plane crashed. And when he came home, he had a fairly brand new wife and a daughter he'd never met before. And he had what we think is now called PTSD. The alcohol and the abuse. Yep. Not a happy childhood.
I don't give a shit what the doctor said, Charlotte. I'm having another drink. The hell I ain't. You go to hell if you think you're going to stop me. Bitch, I said I'm having a drink. Try to stop me, I'll knock you upside your head. God damn, bitch, I said get out the way! Dad misses her with a chair. Mom runs and locks herself in my sister's bedroom. Dad starts kicking the door. My whole family lives in fear of my father. Every day, I live with the same awful thought. The best outcome is that he kills himself and doesn't take anyone else with him.
All these fathers came back extremely damaged, completely understandably. It must have been very, very difficult to be a wife or a child. So the children might have had very mixed feelings about their fathers. On the one hand, really wanting to know what happened, but on the other hand, maybe not wanting to know too much, actually. But then to actually go to the place where their fathers nearly lost their lives, how incredibly brave it was of them to come.
There were 29 planes. They left from Foggia in southern Italy. The mission was to attack Wöllersdorf, the big aerodrome of the Nazis. The plane had to turn around about 10 minutes before it reached Wöllersdorf because an engine started burning. The plane was shot down before it then finally crashed. Thousands of pilots came down in the area of Austria in the Second World War. 200 had been lynched by the local population that were actually not taken prison, but were murdered by the population where they had come down. So many little circumstances lead either this way or that way. Sometimes it's just a few votes or the wrong person at the wrong moment in the wrong place. That's what happens when things go wrong.
And that really brings the full circle how lucky we are. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience to come where my father had been and to relive all the memories. It just rekindled my whole father spirit.
It just makes you think about what he must have gone through that young when they were in the war. And they were just kids.
They were very brave men. I can't imagine what it was like to be in an airplane that was coming down and not ever having experience putting a parachute on, and then to be captured and put into a prison camp.
I found out a lot, and I'm so happy I came.
I understand now why my dad was antisocial. I think he just didn't really know how to overcome what happened to him. Now that I know that, I have a lot more appreciation for my dad and what he did.
As a prisoner of war, I have seen men shot for practically no reason. I have seen them kicked when trying to crawl down the road. I have seen men starving. I have seen men die. I arrived in New York Harbor on June 12, 1945, a year and 6 months after I left the States and 40 days after I was liberated. It is impossible to express the gratitude I feel towards those men who liberated us and to those who have helped us in all our troubles.
What's come out of it, I think, has been really actually quite incredible. It's touched a few people's lives, but it's touched a few people's lives very significantly. Basically, we're all just normal people. We're also alike. Maybe for them, they realize that the Austrians aren't all running around with long black leather coats with a swastika on our arm anymore. That sounds terribly superficial, but I think that's what it boils down to. Maybe there's some hope that by remembering, one can keep some sort of peace, that is a sort of preventative measure. And also realize how lucky we are. It's extraordinary that some person like Georg would go to all that effort, collect this all together and actually make something out of it.
Das ist eigentlich der Reiz in dieser ganzen Geschichte, dass du ständig stoßt auf ungeklärte Sachen, wo du dir denkst, wie könnte es gewesen sein, was vielleicht so, du machst dir ein Bild drüber und dann kommt eine Antwort, die entweder dir bestätigt, was du dir ausgedacht hast, oder sie ist ganz anders. Bis zu diesem Moment, nicht, geht's weiter. Ist noch nicht beendet. Okay.
But no, you can't go on forever. No. You mean when he's 90, he'll still be going with his metal detector in the woods? I don't think so.
I had 21 missions in, I was on my 22nd. So we went in, and there were no fighters that took off from England. We didn't have any escort. The pilot called it out, about 100 fighters at a time coming through, German fighters. We lost another 60 planes on that mission. Our plane was credited with 4 destroyed aircraft. And I didn't get back. I was shot down, knocked out of formation close to Berlin. I never got to the target, or we didn't. And we eventually got shot down going over Cologne, Germany, and that's where we bailed out and were taken prisoner. All of the crew survived. My name is William Provansha, and the last name is Provonsha. Provansha.
And what was your rank in the military?
I was a staff sergeant, aerial gunner, and I was an armor gunner. I grew up, born and raised in Toledo, Ohio, 1922. I went to school there. I went to Wade High School and played on the state champions football team in 1939. And I lived out in an area north of Toledo called Point Place, and we were bused to school every day back from 1937 to 1940 when I graduated. At that time was a blocking back when we were playing in a single wing formation before the I formation took over. During the Prohibition days, we were kind of a gathering point for the mobs out of Detroit, the Purple Gang and so forth, for bootlegging and so forth. It was a kind of a rough town, but good people. Let's say we had Hungarian sections and Birmingham, Toledo, and then Czechs out in Ironville. And then, of course, we had the Polish and the German up on the hill in Toledo. This was when I was young. I never visited those places until I went to high school. So, well, known for Jeep. Yeah, Willys Overland started there, and that was the main. And of course, I worked for Dana Corporation, or Spicer, just before and during the war until I went into the service. So we were all automotive parts and so forth. We were tied in with Jeep and Chevrolet and General Motors, in fact, Mercury's. I was 17 when I graduated, so I did anything I could. I parked cars for a while, and then I finally got a job with an engineering company making bending pipes and so forth for the oil industry, the refineries over on the east side. And then we developed, we were bending struts for aircraft landing gear. And then I went from there to Dana and worked for them until I went in the war. But in Dana, I was on the bull gang, sweeping and wheelbarrows with cement and so forth, and enlarging the place. I did mostly cleanup work. I enlisted in the Air Force in October of '42. I knew that my draft card was almost in the mail to me, so I run down and joined the Air Force, picking my main service that I wanted to go into. Army Air Corps.
Army Air Corps.
Yeah. And so I enlisted and sworn in on October the 16th, 1942 at Camp Perry, Ohio. I went from there to Atlantic City for my basic training. I actually stayed in Hotel Ambassador there while we were learning to drill and march on the boardwalk in the sand on the beach.
Funny.
So they were offering through our tests that if you wanted to get into gunnery, you would be promoted to a sergeant on graduation, which was $50 more a month in pay. So I took that, and I went to Tyndallfield, Florida for my gunnery. And I was in the same class as Clark Gable was in down there. I never associated with him because he had an assistant with him. He came in from town, went to school, and went back out. But he did go through gunnery school. Well, I went through gunnery school, and I told you, you got this Tyndallfield, Florida, and I got my sergeant's ratings and my wings in May of '43. And from there, I went to Denver, Colorado, to armament school at Lowry Field. I had, I think, 8 weeks of training there in armament, small caliber weapons, turrets, electrical systems, and bomb racks. And I graduated from that. And after those 2 schoolings, all of the graduated schools sent their members to Salt Lake City as a gathering point, and they assigned crews from that point, you know, the flight engineers, assistants, the radio operators, the gunners, the tail, and then
You stayed together with that crew.
then you stayed together with that crew. Then we went to Boise and we got our pilot and co-pilot. No, my pilot's name was Irving Moore from California, Sherman Oaks, California. He, after the war, was a director of Dynasty on TV. So I never did get to see him in person after, because I was living in Toledo and he's out there. But I did maintain contact with the co-pilot, was Wallace Chapel in Raleigh, North Carolina, and he kept me posted. And but we were assembled into a crew, and then we started training in Boise. We were flying 4 hours of flight, 4 hours of school, and 4 hours of rest around the clock. And we were the last B-17 group to leave Boise, and the 24s came in when we left, and they were one of the pilots and the operations officer was Jimmy Stewart. And you couldn't get to the flight line for the wax. Anyway, we went from there to Spokane, Washington at Geiger Field and continued training on flights and schooling. And then from there to Pendleton, Oregon. And that's where we finished up our training, and we were named the Bowman Provisional Group. And we had, I don't know how many planes, how many pilots, I was never aware of that. But anyway, we all flew together, and we did a lot of gunnery, air to ground and so forth. But what we needed was high altitude flying that we never got. So we went from Pendleton to Grand Island, Nebraska. And there we picked up a new B-17, and we were headed for the war theater in Europe.
In August of 43.
In August of 43, we flew to Bangor, Maine, and stopped there to fuel and get together, and then we went to Gander Bay, Newfoundland. August of 43, we were headed for the European theater of war, and we flew to Bangor, Maine, and fueled up and got rested, and we went to Gander Bay, Newfoundland, which was our takeoff place for England. And we took off from Gander Bay in the evening on August the 31st, one by one. We never flew in formation. You were just one after the other. You flew independently, and you didn't fly probably around 500 to 1,000 feet. But during the crossing, we run into some icing conditions, and of course that used extra fuel, and so we changed the altitudes a couple times to try to break the ice loose, which he did, and we flew over Island in the morning at sunrise, and then we went over to Prestwick, and unfortunately it was fogged in at Prestwick, and the pilot couldn't line up with the runway. He tried it several times, but the last time he tried, we hit the earth very hard enough to knock one of the landing gear wheels off. So that told us we couldn't land on the runway. We got the plane up in the air miraculously. We also wonder we didn't pile in, but he got it up, and we circled out over the bay from Prestwick, and he headed it in toward shore, and we ditched it in the water. And we ended up very near shore. We didn't have to use the life rafts or anything, but we were about waist deep in water. So that's Scratch 1 B-17. And as a result of that, 2 of our crew members refused to fly anymore. So when we finally got to our base in Ridgewell, the 381st Bomb, we had a crew of 8. We lost 2, and no plane. Of course, they took the plane to Bovington anyway, and they modify it for combat, and then they send them out from there to the different airfields. So, but anyway, we were short 2 people when we got to Ridgewell, our 381st Bomb. We were assigned to the 532nd Bomb Squadron. We then went to our base in Ridgewell, which is 167 was the number of the base, and it was about 30 miles from Cambridge, south of Cambridge, 70 miles north of London. In Sussex County, all the airfields the B-17s were in that area. We had 43 heavy bombardment groups in that one area. And so then we were sent to The enlisted men were sent up to a place called the Wash for a gunnery school, which was run by the English, and they would bring you up to date on how to conduct how to shoot and so forth, and what the German fighters would do and all that sort of. It was just a refresher course in gunnery, really. And then we went back to the base, and then on October the 14th, 1943, we flew our first mission together, and that was to Schweinfurt at the ball bearing plant, October the 14th, 1943. And that was the first mission that I flew, and we lost 60 bombers that day. Now my pilot, Irving Moore, had flown with another crew 2 other missions before he took his own crew up us. And he went to Acklam and Bremen, and they were in a week's time, we lost 150 17s. And it looked very bleak. Yeah, the tour was 25 missions, if you could make it. And surprisingly, the Memphis Belle finished their 25 before I got over there. But when our crew joined the 381st, there was 50% of the original crew were shot down or are gone. And after I flew the first mission, when I started in October, we were down to 80% of the original people were gone. We were all new crews, and from then on it was replacement after replacement flying together. Well, on my first mission, you're green, nobody realizes what you're getting into. But we were flying, fortunately we were supposed to be flying the tail end Charlie, which is the low group, and that's one of the first sections of the bomb group that the Germans attacked, usually. Something happened, you're fighting the weather, everything. It was foggy that day, and it took us a long time to break through the fog, about 10,000 feet before we could join up. And we were late forming up, and in the meantime, a group from the 305th bomb, doing the same thing, they tied into our group at the low group position. And our leaders then took us up with the 91st in the high element, and which was an odd looking formation, but that's where we were. And it was fortunate because the 305th lost about 11 planes out of their group. They just got beat terribly. And that was when we realized when we reached the German-French border, you didn't have any escort. They didn't have the range to go any further at that time. And then you were in for it. You could see the German fighters waiting for you. And when our fighters turned back, they were getting after us. We didn't have the P-51 yet. It was coming in. It got so that in January we had fighter cover all the way through. And then the advent of the belly tanks too. They carried belly tanks, the P-47s and the 38s, all of them carried belly tanks after that. And they could take us further in, which was needed, because if they hadn't, they would have I'm sure they would have defeated us. They had too many planes and we had too few. During that first mission, and a new crew, and we had to change planes because the first one we had, spare parts had a faulty engine, so we had to switch to another one called the Last Straw. Was the name of the old B-17E that we flew. And we flew to Schweinfurt with a half a bomb bay of gas and a half of bombs. And during that mission, we had gun malfunctions, especially up in the nose. And being the armorer, I was required to go up to the nose to get the guns firing again. And in doing so, I took off my parachute harness. And I made that trip twice. And then after we landed and the mission was over, I never took my harness off again. Never. Well, you had to go through the bomb bay, and you couldn't get through it with all your flight clothes on, plus your harness. And it was a struggle getting through to get to the nose of the plane. And so I realized then, and we all realized, it's going to be a tough road to hoe to make 25. Some missions, your group calls it a milk run. You don't see any fighters, and that flak is not too heavy, but that doesn't mean the other elements of the flight aren't catching hell in the back of you. So to one crew, it's a nice easy run, just a little flak, and then you're back. And the other ones, it's a bad situation, and they lose a lot of planes. Oh, we flew our missions to all the German places and France, but on January on the 4th in 1944, we took off for Kiel, Germany. And why I remember this is because we had a crew that we knew very well in our barracks, and we lived with them for a while. They had 24 missions they were finishing up. They took off in our plane, and they crashed outside the airport, the airfield, and they all were killed. And I always sticks in my mind that they were almost done. They were ready to go home, and it didn't happen. And that was Lieutenant Clor's crew. 13th mission was on January the 11th, and that was to Oschersleben, which is very close, about 90 miles from Berlin. And on that day, we're getting back to the weather you have to fight that. The weather was very heavy and down deep, and Doolittle was then in charge since January, and he, for whatever reason, they called the 3 of the divisions back because the weather was so bad they were afraid they wouldn't be able to find their fields when they got back. But we were leading the bomb mission, and we were almost about 100 miles from the target, so we never got the message for some reason or other. So we went in, and there were no fighters that took off from England. We didn't have any escort. And we had the pilot called it out, about 100 fighters at a time coming through, German fighters. And we had none except one of the P-51 pilots won the Medal of Honor because he protected a group that he was near with his squadron, saved the whole group. But we lost another 60 planes on that mission, and our plane was credited with 4 destroyed aircraft, but the one of them come in from the tail and hit us with about 6 or 7 20 millimeters and almost severed the foot off of the right waist gunner standing next to me. And during the fight and so forth, I gave him morphine and sulfa powder and covered him up. And then when it quieted down a little bit, the ball turret gunner, Ed Connors, come up and helped me, and we splinted his leg. And we made it back to base, not to our base, but we landed at a B-24 base. That's fine. We wanted to get down quick. We didn't have much fuel. And the flight surgeon, looking at little Joe Clement with his foot, and so he wrote letters of commendation to my squadron and Colonel Lieber, our commanding officer. And so they I didn't get these the medals, the DFC, and that's until I got home. I didn't know about it, but they presented the medals to my wife in December of '44 at Bear Field in Fort Wayne, and the only time I knew about it after I got home after the war. So yeah, I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with a oak leaf cluster, and then I had 2 oak leaf clusters added to the Air Medal for the enemy aircraft I shot down. Our plane accounted for 4. The group accounted for 18. The most fighters shot down in our group on a mission. And it was due to the fact of the weather, and we didn't have the cover, and we lost 8 planes out of one of our squadrons, and that was almost an empty area in that bomb squadron. Look, it was bad. That was my 13th. And then I flew on, and we went most always into Germany. They weren't, and I might say that Austersleben raid was the start of Doolittle's attack on the German Luftwaffe, because he turned the P-47s and the 51s loose after they got us to the target. He turned them loose, and they took targets of opportunity and shot down other fighters and strafed and everything. And the intent was to weaken the German Luftwaffe, and that was the start of it. Turn things around, and that was Doolittle's idea, that you wouldn't be able to have an invasion if you don't defeat the German Air Force. And that's what we were doing. Other missions were some rough, some not, but we didn't have as much fighter opposition until they briefed us for Berlin. We knew we were going to have to go sooner or later, and the British had been bombing it at night for some time. But we had never been to Berlin, so they started briefing, and I read where the lines to sick call were long, knowing where they were going. Not everybody wanted to go, but as a result of that, I guess, I flew, and I was chosen to fly with another crew, a spare gunner, that one that wasn't going on the flight, with Lieutenant Fastrup. And I didn't know anybody, they're all new. They come in. I had 21 missions in. I was on my 22nd. My original pilot, Irving Moore, was the operations officer at the time. He came to the barracks and said, "Yeah, Provenza, you're flying with Fastrup this morning." And so you get up and go. And I didn't get back. I was shot down, knocked out of formation close to Berlin. I never got to the target, or we didn't. And we eventually got shot down going over Cologne, Germany, and that's where we bailed out and were taken prisoner. All of the crew survived. Well, the first pass when you're in the original flight going in, we're just starting on the bomb run. I hadn't opened the bomb bay doors yet, but these fighters came through because there was a break in the formation. The formation ahead of us veered off a little bit and left that opening, and fighters went right on through and knocked 3 of our planes out of the formation. That was the key for your defense, to keep everything tight. And they hit our number 3 engine right at the top. You couldn't feather the prop, and we dropped out of formation and went down to a lower level of clouds and tried to get back to England by ourselves. Any stray B-17 stragglers, that's what they look for. But I think in this flight to Berlin, they were trying to knock as many bombers out of the formation as they could. They pick up the stragglers later. I think that's why we got as far back as Cologne. Oh, that was about 3 in the afternoon. And when we got another fighter picked us up then and set a number 4 engine on fire. And shortly after that, we got the order to bail. And so we were flying at about 8,500 feet, I think. We were not at altitude, and you couldn't maintain it. And our bomb bay doors were sprung open. We were windmilling a prop, and we're flying just flight speed. And when it got on fire, I was the first one out. We were in heavy flak over Cologne, which is noted for in the Ruhr Valley there. So I delayed my chute opening for couple thousand feet. And I landed on the factory roof in Cologne. I could see the Rhine River and the cathedral coming down. I didn't want to go that way. Anyway, I landed on the roof and I waited for the military to come up and get me. That was the safest way because the streets down below were filled of civilians and they were kind of nasty, you know, American Schweinhund, gangster, all that sort of thing. So I stayed up there. So I got safely down with the military and they took me to the air base close by, and we never got involved with the SS or the Gestapo or anything, which was fortunate.
Yeah.
Yes. And we only stayed at the air base overnight. After I got through with Gulag Luft and the interrogation, then they shipped us to a memo up on the Baltic Sea in Lithuania. And that was Stalag Luft number 6. And we were there from March until July. And things were kind of rough at the beginning as far as food was concerned. We didn't get any bad treatment by the guards. We were guarded by German Luftwaffe personnel. We weren't guarded by the SS or the regular German army. So we stayed in 6 until July, and the Russians started coming in from the east. And so they had us move out in July. And in order to do that, we had to go to the port of Memel, and they put us on 2 different coal ships. They were old tramp steamers. And the English were in, most of them were in one, and U.S. flyers were in the second one. But you went down on a ladder from the deck of the ship into the hold where the coal was carried, and that's where you were. They just stuffed you down in there, and there was no place to sit down or nothing. And we had the metal hump that covers the propeller shaft in the middle. And so my friend and I, John Plotz, my POW buddy, we went up the sides and slung our belts and that between the ribs of the ship, and we got up off of the floor. We were in there for 2 days without food and water. You get water, but if you had to pay for it in cigarettes and have the guard lower a bucket and they would put water in, but you had to pay for it with cigarettes. Well, through the Red Cross parcels that we had before we left. So cigarettes were the money in camp. Everything that you wanted to buy, you had to pay for in cigarettes if you wanted. We went west and down into the port of the Schweinemund is what it's called, to Stettin. And from there we were put on trains, but we were shackled together, a couple, 2 together. They put chains on your hands and a chain on your foot, and then they put you in the 40x8 box cars for transportation. And the guards stayed in the front half and we stayed in the other half of the boxcar. But the shackles were like dime store things. You had a sharp object like a nail. You could hit the spring and unlock them, which we did, but we didn't take them off. We just loosened them up. We were just going to the Schweinemund, the port there, and then we went south and we went down to Poland in this train, shackled, and we went to Stalag Luft 4. And that was at Gross Techow was the name of the camp. And but before we got to the camp, we got off of the boats and we had to march from the station. We went to a station, then we got off there of the train, and then we endured what they call the Heidekrug Run. We had to go 2 miles through the woods to get to the camp, but the commandant of the camp was a a bad-natured officer, and he demanded that we run. And of course, there were a lot of them that were wounded and couldn't make it. And they had the guards and the dogs lined the way. And luckily I was in good shape. I didn't get bothered, nor did my friend John. But some of them got bayonet stabbed, and dogs bit them and so forth. But it was in the middle of July the 17th. And we finally had the guards would actually, if you had carrying a parcel of your belongings on your back, they would cut it loose and make you drop it and all that. And then they would go through and loot what they could out of it after you're gone. And this camp is where we met Big Stoop. He was a German guard. Well, Big Stoop, he started in 4, he went to the next move in from 6. We moved out in July, and we went down to Poland and Großtetschau, and we were there from July to February of 45. And that was the start of the coldest winter they had in Europe for a long time. And we did all right. We finally got food parcels, the Red Cross, and that's what actually saved us, because we're subsisting on what they call ersatz coffee. It's water with roasted acorns, that's coffee, and boiled potatoes, and maybe a soup at night, near the night. So we were losing weight naturally, but when we got the Red Cross parcels, we started picking it up and doing all right. But then the Russians again started coming in, and we could hear their guns, and they moved us out of there. I fortunately got on a train, and I headed for Nuremberg. There was another train that took the wounded and they took them to Stalag Luft 1, where the officers were at, I think in Sagan. And so it took us 9 days to get to Nuremberg. You know, luckily we weren't bombed or anything, but there was not room enough to lay down. There were no facilities for toilets or anything like that. And everybody couldn't sit down or lay down at the same time. It was 9 days but it was, the rest of the camp started their march. 80 to 90 day march where they slept out in the open or in barns or whatever. And they had to forage for food and try to bargain with people along the way. And but fortunately I went to Nuremberg instead, and that's when in February of 45, and it took us 12 days to get there, or excuse me, 9 days to get to Nuremberg from the old camp from Nuremberg to up at Stalag Luft 4. And then we split up. Right. 5 was too many, and so Larry Giles and his 2 guys that I didn't know took off their way, and John and I went together. And later on I found out, when Larry stopped in Erie, Michigan, and told me that they had been picked up by the soldiers and put back in the column, which was fortunate. They ended up down at Moosburg. And so John and I continued on, and we crossed autobahns, and we walked through towns. We walked by soldiers talking to girls on the roadside at night. Just like we belonged there, and that's the best. Well, they joined the column that was marching south to Austria, to Camp 7A, where they were assembling all of the prisoners that were marching. And so they were fortunate enough to be able to get back in the column rather than be be shot or something. Yeah. So he made it all right. Unfortunately, about 3 weeks after we talked in Erie, Michigan, when he came through from visiting his sister, he got down to Chattanooga or wherever he lived, and he fell off a stepladder and died as a result of it. But anyway, John and I continued on, and on the 12th day of traveling at night, and that we were getting pretty well beat up and tired, but we ended up on the 12th day, we were up on top of a hill, and there was a German entrenchment up there. They had dug trenches and so forth, and we ended up there on top of that hill, and there was a tank, a German tank in back of us down in the, I don't know how far away, but it was firing shells over at the Americans that were approaching, and then the artillery from the US was going back over, and we were under it. And so finally the tank took off. We could hear it. It was close enough we could hear it, and it took off and got out of there, and the artillery stopped. And about that time, we're looking down on this little town, and we saw these vehicles and people, army personnel down there, and somebody, we could hear them shout, "Put up them goddamn white flags." And so the civilians, the village, had to stick their bed sheets out the window and let them come through. And when we heard that and saw that, we started down the hill, and we got down. They let us come in, and later told us that they almost threw a couple rounds up there because they could see us up there. And we were dressed in what's GI overcoats. They were full-length overcoats, and that was verboten because the Germans had confiscated a lot of U.S. uniforms and infiltrated with them. So anybody with a long coat, you were fair game. But they held up because there's only the two of us running down the hill. So we got out of it alive, and then we met one of Patton's 3rd Armored Spearheads there, and I've never been able to get the name perfect that I can remember, but I think it was Troutskirchen, Kirchen meaning church, and that was the town. I think I never have found it on the map. I never knew anybody that could trace it for me. But we went down in there, and of course they fed us, and we slept overnight in somebody's feather bed in one of the homes. And then John and I took we were playing shotgun. We took some prisoners back to Mannheim, Germany, too. And we took them back and dropped them off in the wire back at Mannheim. Then stayed at Mannheim at the airport there for about a week. And I got a ride on a C-47 to Paris, reported in, and the war wasn't over. It was April the 20th or something like that. So they had hook me up with an intelligence officer, take my story, and try to confirm that I was really a USGI, you know. So the intelligence officer's name was Stone Christopher. He was a captain. He was in the Hotel Francois, and he interrogated me, and I don't know if you got that picture of that escape. That's the proof that I escaped. And what I didn't do when I got to Le Havre, France, shortly after, I should have tried to work my way back to my base in England and presented that stuff to them. So what I have, nobody else has except you, that you copied it. Yeah, and that's a special item that I have to prove that I was a prisoner and that I escaped, and was interviewed, and I have that pass that said I wasn't identified. And things are coming to an end, and I was in Camp Lucky strike, and probably one of the first POWs that come out, not one of the first, but some of the first that come out of Germany on an escape that weren't repatriated or released. And they weren't prepared to feed us. You know, we ate some stuff that made us sick and we couldn't take it. And so it was a kind of a trying time there, but you know, you get used to it. Then they put us on the troop ship, USS George Washington, not the USS, but the US troop ship George Washington. And we went to a port in southern England, I think it was Southport for sure. And from there we took over and started home in convoy. The war wasn't over, and we were traveling with LSTs and all kind of that slow traffic, and we had to go slow because you had to travel with the slowest one. But anyway, it took us 2 weeks to get home, and the war ended when we were in the middle of the Atlantic. They signed it off on May the 8th, 45. And then the nice sight was coming into New York Harbor and the Statue of Liberty. And then I got a 60-day R&R furlough before I had to report back in. Yeah, then we went, I think, Fort Dix, I think. And that's where we were dispersed to go home. Take a 60-day and then come back. Reported in July in Miami Beach. That's where the Air Force had all the hotels for repats and so forth. And take your wife with you, which I had a wife too, I was married. And we went down there and stayed in the Coral Sea. No air conditioning, but we had a pool. And then I went through the same thing as I'm doing here, telling my story. And I think unfortunately everything was destroyed in the fire in '76 in St. Louis. From the middle of the alphabet down, they lost most everything. I don't know if I have anything left or not, but that's the reason these seats that I have are important, because there was never any record made of them. So when I go down to Dayton at the Air Force reunion, which all the groups are coming to now because they can't support their individually, I'm going to try to straighten some of that stuff up. I want to talk about the chaplain of our group. His name was James Brown, James G. Brown. And he was with the group from Pio, Texas, through to the end of the war. And of course, he ministered to all of the crews. He was non-denominational. And he wrote a book, The 381st Heroes, All Heroes or something. I have the book, but he did a real good job day by day, not from recall, but as it happened. And he actually flew 5 missions, and he got an air medal. Our first commander, Joe Nazaro, was a West Point man, and he wouldn't let him fly. So when we changed group commanders, Colonel Lieber, he let him go, and he flew 5 missions. And he was flying with a group that I bunked with in the same barracks, Lieutenant Wood's crew. And then now, he passed away on Christmas Day, 2007. He was 107. After the war, in Toledo, I left the job in Spicer or Dana Corporation. We made transmissions, parts, and so forth for tanks and Jeeps for Willys Overland and cars, but they quit making cars, but you had some command vehicles. But that was my job before I left. And in order to keep my super seniority in the plant, you had to be back at work before 30 days were up after your discharge. So when I got back, I went right back to work. So Spicer went on strike too, and I kept getting sent home, the plant shutting down, and I got tired of that, and I didn't go back, and I went to other types of work. And finally, I was in security for Continental Aviation in Toledo. And then when I found out that GM had bought the old propeller plant in town, and they were moving in, they're going to build transmissions, I knew that they would be there for the long haul, and so I went and applied and got a job. I was on supervision for about 3 years, and then at the Alexis plant in Toledo. And so after I went there, I got my job on security, and 3 years later I was asked if I would like to try management and be a foreman. Well, I said, I've done everything else, I might as well try that, you know. So I was a plant supervisor on machining departments and assembly for 26.3 years when they wanted to started early out their employees to reduce expenses and costs. And so I dwelled on it and thought about it, and about the third time it came around, I said, yeah, I'm ready to go. And so now I've been retired 35 years from General Motors. I had the air medal and 3 clusters for my missions and 2 clusters for the planes. I had 6 air medals.
And went pretty much straight into surplus aircraft. The aircraft was purchased and converted by Boeing to be used as a 5-engine test bed. So they actually moved the cockpit back about 48 inches and hung a 5,500 horsepower Allison turboprop on the nose, and was used for several years in that capacity. They would actually take off with the 4 radial engines that are 1,200 horsepower each. They would go to altitude and start the turboprop engine, and then feather the props on all 4 radials, and put some time on their new engines. But eventually they donated that aircraft to a museum, the Bradley Air Museum in Connecticut, and the airplane sat outside on display for 20 or 25 years. And it was the tornado finally came through that area and destroyed a lot of their planes on outside display. There was a C-130 I know that was totally destroyed, an Albatross, big 4-engine plane, was thrown on top of this B-17, and it really totally destroyed the airplane. So there's a guy down in Kissimmee, Florida, Tom Riley. Some of you may have visited his shop. He's rebuilt a lot of World War II aircraft, but Tom took this airplane on trade in exchange for rebuilding a B-25 for the Bradley Air Museum. And it took he and his volunteers over 12 years to complete the restoration. Tom told me that they had over 80,000 paid man hours in this airplane, and more hours than that by the volunteers. So volunteers played a big part. I had the opportunity to purchase this airplane about 2.5 years ago. Tom was working on a P-40 for me, and the people that had this plane were rebuilding it, decided that they didn't want us to gather a group and buy it. So we formed the Liberty Foundation, which is a nonprofit educational foundation, and it actually owns the aircraft, and we're just now beginning to fly it around the country and let people see it. So it's great to be out and showing the aircraft. We flew it for the first time this past December the 8th. Since then, we've put about 110 hours on the airplane. It's doing great. And you know, it's painted, as you notice, it's painted as a 390th Bomb Group B-17. When I was a young guy and I came along just after World War II, all the kids would talk about, you know, what did your father do during the war? And mine was a tail gunner on a B-17 in the 390th Bomb Group. So that worked well, and by starting the foundation, I get to choose the name of the airplane. So the Liberty Bell was a B-17 that was used. It was actually named by my father's group. They flew out of Framingham, England. He made his 35 missions and came home safely. The B-17 went on to fly 64 combat missions in the European theater and was shot up so bad on the last mission that they elected to land at a P-47 base in Belgium, and the airplane was salvaged at that point. But it's been, no one can say what a pleasure it's been for me to be able to help make this happen. We still work closely with the 390th Bomb Group, and they're having a reunion a little later this year, so they'll get a chance to see this plane. But it's great to be with you today. They wanted me to mention also another B-17 that we worked on. I actually started having an interest in B-17s back in 1980 beyond repair. So that was the end of my B-17 effort in Greenland. But we did stick around and went back in 1992, and with Bob Carden as our expedition leader that year, we were able to recover the Glacier Girl over here. And 12 years ago, we actually flew back in here with our C-47 with skis and put parts from the Glacier Girl out on this same ramp for a lot of you to see. So it's great to be back in Oshkosh with a B-17 and a P-38. So a really good day. But I could see that I would never get the B-17 out of the Greenland ice cap. It was too badly damaged and not really worth bringing back. So I began working on another B-17, and I searched Air Force historical records and found that on Christmas Eve in 1947, there was a B-17 on its way back from Greenland trying to get into Goose Bay, and they had some problems and ended up running out of fuel and landed on a frozen lake in Labrador. And the crewmen were rescued the day after Christmas, so no one was injured or lost, but they left the plane behind, and it went through the ice, you know, in the spring thaw. So we went up and finally located that plane in 1998. I started in 1990 trying to negotiate with the provincial government of Newfoundland and Labrador to get the salvage rights on it, and that was a very frustrating experience. We actually found the plane in 1998, but they wouldn't let us bring any part of it out because at that point we didn't have salvage rights to the airplane, and so we ended up in federal court in Canada. And in February of 2004, we finally were granted the right to salvage that aircraft. So we hastily put a group together, went up to Labrador, and last year I had to miss Oshkosh because we were on Dyke Lake. And we raised the airplane with airbags, floated it to the surface. We had to tow it 65 miles down a river and through a large reservoir to a siding where we could get a crane. We disassembled the plane, put it on 3 semi-trucks, and brought it back to Georgia. So now it's sitting at my home base in Douglas, Georgia. Tom Riley is the guy that rebuilt this B-17 and out of Kissimmee, Florida. Tom's agreed to come up and head up the rebuild of the new B-17, the Dyke Lake B-17. So he's got about a 10 or 12 year project ahead of him, and we hope if you ever get through South Georgia, maybe you'll find a way to stop in and check on our progress. But so we hope to have another one flying at some point. But you know, I think we owe the guys that rebuild these airplanes a tremendous debt. That they allow us to have them out so that people can see them and enjoy them, and you know, we can show the grandkids what our fathers and grandfathers fought in and flew in during World War II, and it's a good thing. I know it's got to be worth doing. We hope to see you somewhere in your hometowns in the next year or so. We do plan to put this airplane out on the road. The only way we had to support it is through ride experiences, and so we'll see you. See you on the road. We have, this is the Liberty Bell, and you can probably remember the Liberty Foundation. It owns it, but we have a great website, libertyfoundation.org, and we'll be in a town near you soon, so we hope you'll support us. And it's great being with you today, and really great to be with these guys that you're going to hear from shortly. So thanks very much, and we appreciate all that you do.
Let's hear it for Don Brooks. Thank you, Don. Well, Sam, I understand we have a surprise B-17 guest.
Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, as a matter of fact, we do. This airplane, don't go away, Don. We're going to have some questions and answers after this. This airplane, after the war, was...
Over here. Oh, wait a minute now. He's a fighter pilot. What's he doing flying B-17s? Come on over here a little bit, Bob, so we can get a good camera angle on you.
Thank you. I was fortunate enough to be testing engines for the Allison Division of General Motors.
That's better.
One of the projects I never expected to be flying.
There.
Can you hear me now? Yep. I had never expected when I took the job to be flying bombers. I'd flown a lot of them, and something in my psyche made me want to be a fighter pilot so I wouldn't have to worry about others. If I got into emergencies, I'd know whether I could take the risk or not and not take somebody else with me. Because I had, during earlier days, had to bail people out of bombers, and it's a real concerning feeling when you've told somebody to get out and you don't know if they're going to make it or not. But anyway, on this airplane, I was on the first flight, and I had a crew of engineers who were operating the engine in the nose. And this engine had, I think it was pretty close to 5,000 horsepower, so it was almost equal to the power of all of these four engines, conventional engines. And the test card called for starting the engine for its first time at 5,000 feet. And so I got on my data points and I set it up, had the speed and the correct altitude. And I told the two engineers that were with me, I said, okay, fire it up, I'm ready on the controls. And so they started the engine, and the airplane immediately started shaking. And I said, what's happening? What's causing all the shaking? And they were silent. They didn't know. And I said, you know, I'm having to add power to keep from stalling. And I had all four engines all the way up to full power, and I was still descending. And I said, you've got to either give me more power or shut the engine down immediately. We aren't going to survive this. And I was really descending quite steeply. And by the time they shut it off, I'd gone from 5,000 feet to 1,500 feet with all five engines wide open until just before we hit 1,500 feet. And they got the turboprop shut down. Well, what had happened was the propeller was in reverse. They didn't know it, and I didn't know it. And I thought, boy, if we'd gone in with this airplane, they would have said, there happens to be the dumbest test pilot that ever flew. He's got five engines and can't stay out of a stall. Well, we did have a lot of fun flying it, and the engine was developed, and it was used on a lot of military airplanes and some many airliners. It was a good engine, a very reliable one. I'm privileged to have been invited to say hi to you, and I'll be speaking again tomorrow. And I'll invite you all to come hear me talk about fighter planes.
Bob, did you fly the B-17 any at all during the Second World War?
I did fly it, yes. I got checked out in it. I was able to fly just about every airplane we had in the military, Allied airplanes. They set up production lines in North Africa, And I'd gone to England originally and flew Spitfires up there, and I thought I was going to continue combat down in Africa. And when we got transferred, there were 67 of us, and I had more experience than anybody else, so I thought I was going to combat, and they selected me and a friend of mine to be test pilots. They set up production lines in different cities in North Africa to they'd assemble airplanes that were brought overseas in crates. And then once they'd assembled them, we would work off the squawks and fly it. And we flew repaired airplanes, battle-damaged airplanes. So that was how I got a chance to fly the B-17 and all the rest of the bombers. And it was a fun experience and a growing one because I got baptized to just about every kind of a major concern you might have, because we had indigenous labor assembling these airplanes, and we'd have gear failures, and the best thing that ever happened to me to get about 100 hours a month and that test work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And him a lot. He's one of my dearest friends. Thank you.
Come over here, Colonel, just a little bit. Thank you. They're trying to get the camera angle on. Let me introduce this guy here. He's Colonel Hal Weekly. Sam and I have had the privilege and honor of flying with him on the B-17 for the past 12 years, aluminum overcast. And if you look at aluminum overcast, right under the aircraft commander's window is Hal Weekly's name. And it's painted like his bomb group, the 398th Bomb Group. And it's a real honor to be with him anytime, but especially since he is the highest and longest, has the most longevity on the B-17 of any pilot in history, with 58 years flying the B-17. Hal, thank you. And welcome. Give us a kind of a synopsis of your career, if you would.
Fine, Danny, but thank you very much for the kind words, you and Sam both. It's been a real pleasure flying with everyone. I've always said all my life that I love flying, which I did 58 years of it, so stuck with it pretty good. And I love the equipment, I love the power, but it's the people you meet in aviation that are the thrill to me. And it's not only the pilots that I work with, the engineers, but the people out in the field and yourself, the people that enjoy airplanes and aviation. And it's just a privilege for me to be here. I guess, like Bud Anderson said the other day, at 84, it's a privilege to be most any place. So more than happy to be here, and I want to start off with telling you a little bit about, as Danny had mentioned, I started off flying, well, let's see, Sam brought to my attention today that this is the 62nd anniversary of the day I got my pilot rating and became a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army Air Forces. So that's July. Thank you. That's July the 28th of 1943. And then on August the 4th of 1943, I started flying the B-17 and married my sweetheart the same day. So I think that now we have, this August the 4th, we'll have 62 years of that too. I've always said that I was very proud. I came from the poor side of the family, and we didn't have much. I grew up in the Depression. I was a second lieutenant in the Air Force. I had my pilot's wings. I was flying the biggest airplane in the world and married the prettiest girl in town, and it don't get no better than that. Now, I will say that I've been here over a period of 26 years. I did miss 1 year, and that was in, let's see, that was 1993, and that was my 50th wedding anniversary, and I thought I should stay home for that one. Maybe that's one of the reasons I got to 62 years, I don't know. But I did miss one, so I've been with everybody for 26 years, flew the Aluminum Overcast for 23 years. Most of the people that I've talked with, they're interested a little bit about my military career. As you know, I started flying the B-17 August the 4th, 1943. I went to Europe in June. I got in there in June the 12th of 44. Had 520 hours total time. And I flew a couple of missions around England just to get a feel for the whole thing. And then on June the 21st, I had my first mission, and it was to Berlin. Now, everything was backwards with me in the Air Force. I wanted to fly P-38s, so they gave me B-17s. I wanted to fly a bomber to Europe and come back on a ship. So you know what happened. I went over to the ship and flew back. I wanted to get a couple of missions into occupied territory, some short ones, and get a feel for the whole thing. So the first thing they did was they gave me the longest one, and that was to Berlin. And then, of course, I got shot down on a milk run, which I wanted in the first place. So everything was backwards, but you got to look at it a different way. I'm still here. So it all worked out for the good. I had a crew of 10 of us. As you probably know, have a bombardier, navigator, pilot, co-pilot, a top turret flight engineer, radio operator, ball turret, 2 waist gunners, and a tail turret. We have 13 50 caliber machine guns on the airplane. Something that most people don't know. The most ammunition that any one gunner could carry was 750 rounds. And the additional thing was that the rate of fire of a Browning 50 caliber is 750 rounds per minute. So we would fly a mission of 8, 9, 10 hours. You had 1 minute of firing time. So you had to use it very judiciously. But there's a lot of things we had to use judiciously. We're sitting at 25,000 feet, 50 degrees below zero. And you got fighters coming at you, and you got anti-aircraft coming at you. And you're sitting there sweating trying to hold an airplane in formation. So it's very interesting. I was telling some of my good friends the other night that hadn't realized it, but you think about it for a few minutes, and I was the first lieutenant after a while, and made $531 a month. So I was flying a mission 8, 9, 10 hours a day for $17. I don't think that was being overly paid, and I don't think you get anybody to do it now for that money. But on the 20th mission, I was leading the low squadron of a high group dropping on a railroad bridge at a place called La Manoir. And this is up the river between Le Havre and Paris. And we were bombing a bridge because we were trying to keep this is on August the 13th, 1944. We're trying to keep the Germans from taking all their heavy equipment back into Germany itself, so they could establish. Some of my cohorts on the tour, they like to hear me make this comment about, I had number 1 engine was feathered, number 2 engine was on fire, number 3 engine was windmilling, hydraulics were shot out, the communications were shot out, had a fire in the tail, had a fire in the radio room. I'm 22 years of age. I thought we could make it. Wrong again. I only had 45 to 50 miles to go to the English Channel. I was really trying to hope to get to the Channel, and maybe the British had a great air-sea rescue program. I thought maybe we'd get there, but about that time, since again we had no communications, I mentioned, about that time the ball turret came up, and he signaled to the waist gunner, and the waist gunner to the radio man to the flight engineer, and the flight engineer to me. He come up, hey, Skipper, he said, the left wing is on fire. But that number 2 engine is burning through the metal, and the aluminum is bubbling up and turning black. Well, a lot of things we could handle, a lot of things I thought we could handle, but I knew one thing, couldn't handle a wing on fire. So I turned around and looked back through the flight deck, and everybody's head was sticking out there, everybody looking at me. I just went one wave like that, and out they went. Now, we wore chest packs because, and we put the chest pack underneath the seat, and that left us with a harness on. Well, what you do is when you have to get out of the seat, then you have to get that chest back and clip it on. And I was flying in the right seat because I was leading the low squadron. And if you see the size of these windshields, you don't have too big of windows. And if you're flying as a commander from the left seat over to the right, you don't have much visibility. So I was flying from the right seat. And incidentally, the hydraulic system is right behind the right seat. And as I mentioned before, it had been hit. Well, there was a bunch of red fluid running down the flight deck, and we had 9 people on board that day. 7 people got Purple Hearts, of which I was one. And I looked down and I saw all that red fluid, and I said, you know, I must be hit harder than I thought I was, because, you know, with the adrenaline pumping and the anxiety and everything, you just don't really feel some of those pain. However, when I got off the flight deck and down out of the cockpit onto the flight deck, I realized it was hydraulic fluid and not my blood. So I was very, very pleased about that. But when I went to reach underneath my seat to get my parachute, it wasn't there. And I'm sure if I'd never panicked before, that would be a fine time to panic. I don't know whether I did or not, but I know my eyes were big. I turned around and looked at my flight engineer, and old Joe was standing there holding my parachute. I said, thank you, Joe. And I took and clipped it on, and he went out through the bomb bay and went out back, and the co-pilot and I, we went out the nose right here. And you see, this engine's on fire, and that wing is burning right there, and we went out right here. So it gets pretty hot for just a moment, but then again, like I said, you're 25,000 feet and it's 50 below zero, so a little heat sometimes ain't that bad. Now, we were in an area where the people were shooting at us from the ground with rifles and machine guns, and that's sort of tacky, you know, a guy hanging in a parachute. So what I did, my only one jump I ever made in my life was that particular day, and I delayed my opening in my parachute for 4 miles. Now, whether you know it or not, your free body falls at 120 miles an hour, so that's 2 good minutes right there.
Hold it real close, there's so much noise.
Okay.
Mic real close.
He told me to hold it close. If I start to scream, I'm going to hit him in the head. I don't like those squeals, but it worked out. We're trying to overcome the airplane noise. Of course, it's a bad place to be around an airport with no airplanes, but we have to enjoy all of them. But I opened the parachute I think about 4,000 or 5,000 feet, maybe 3,000 feet, and didn't have any problem with it. Now, my navigator, his parachute ended up with 13 holes in his chute, so they were shooting at him. So we do know that they were active down there. I know it's hot and it's sunny out there, and I won't take too long. A couple of quick things. 50 years after all this took place, I received a package in the mail, and it has large pictures of my airplane on the ground in all pieces. One piece with a left wing and number 1 engine laying up against the side of a tree with a bunch of holes in it. Another wing someplace else, fuselage someplace else, and we never did find the tail. But one engine, number 3 engine, the one that was running away, it fell off back a few miles. They sent me a nice map and showed me where everything was. And it just so happened that particular day there was a young fellow named Bernard Noel, and he was 7 years old and standing out in a field watching the bombers go back to England, and he saw one bomber up there circling around. And so he watched it, and it made about 2 circles, and then it blew up, and that was my bomber. Now, in 1998, he became the mayor of that little area there, and accumulated the money and built a beautiful monument to our air crew. I couldn't go at the time because I was flying the aluminum overcast, but the next year, Billy and I went, my wife, we went over and thanked them for their kind gesture, and it was a beautiful monument, and they treated us royally. And while there, I met a daughter of a gentleman who had helped me evade. As a matter of fact, the first day, he had 2 bicycles, and he and I started pedaling down to the south, heading for the Allied lines, which, of course, you know, D-Day was June the 6th, so this was August the 13th, so I had a little bit of time there. So it took me 6 weeks to get out. I was the first airman from the 398th Bomb Group to escape from occupied territory. And I met this lady, and she said her father had passed away the year before. And she knew that we had written me several letters. I had responded, and she said, we don't have any copies. Could you send me a couple of copies of those letters? And I said, why, certainly I will. So I got home, and I had about 7 letters, so I sent her either the bracelet that he had worn for so many years. They sent it back to me, and there it is right there. And I put it on 55 years to the day that I gave it to him. So that was a tremendous experience for me right there. I will, can I open up for questions, a few questions?
Yeah, we could do that.
If anyone has any questions, I'd be glad to try to address them. I know we don't have much time. I know it's awful hot out there in the sun. But
First of all, I'd like to know how many veterans are in the audience. How many veterans? Raise your hands, please. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Does anybody have a question for Hal or for Don? Unfortunately, Bob Hoover had to leave us, but does anyone have a question? We can take a few quick ones.
those old guys, they need to take a nap in the afternoon.
I understand. I can't believe this. Nobody has a question.
That's it.
This question's for Don. You probably know a pilot named Chester Kearney from Iron River. He's a friend of mine. You talked to him?
Yes, I've talked to Chester. He's a great guy. He and his co-pilot, Jack Bullington, that landed the Dyke Lake airplane in 1947, are great guys. They're real interested in our project. They gave us help for a lot of years, and they really helped us find the airplane because they had some aerial photos that they were able to take, when the rescue plane came in and picked them up, a DC-3 with skis. So, yeah, if you're from Iron River, give our best to Chester, and we hope to see him soon. Thank you.
Hal, this question's for you.
Yeah, Hal, just wondered what altitude you were at when you guys were hit by the flak on the last mission.
We're around about 23,000, really, about 23,000 feet. But asking about questions remind me of a very quick story. Primary flight school, Decatur, Alabama, PT-17s. The first day we're in class, and everybody's talking about the various operations of the airplane. And there's a big old guy sitting next to the table to us, and he was pretty crude. Wasn't much of an instructor as far as I was concerned. And at the end of it, he said, anybody have any questions? And they didn't have any questions. They don't know enough to ask questions. I didn't either. He said, okay, you know everything, so I'll take care of that. So one of the other cadets, he said, we're going to take care of that tomorrow. We ain't going to have no more of that. So the next day, when the flight instructor says, anybody have any questions? This one kid got up and said, yes, sir. He says, would you tell me all about torque? And you know what the instructor said? He said, hell, everybody knows all about torque. So I'm hesitant to ask about questions, but as far as I'm concerned, this concludes our little deal here at the airport, and I feel so privileged to be here and with all you, and I hope you have a great time here. And every time I speak to any kind of a group, the last thing I say is, God bless America.
Hal, Colonel Weekly, we want to thank the Colonel for being here. I'm sure he'll be glad to stand around and sign a few autographs if you have something. Is that right? Yeah.